Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Melanie Tana, and I love to talk about stories. And I think I just found a new favorite, and that would be The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. First of all, this was one of my picks for October with the intention of reading slightly scarier, creepier vibe things, right? And I wanted to read an actual, horror story. I don't read horror, so my knowledge of the genre is limited, and so my opinions on this book are not so much to do with comparing it to other horror books, but about the writing and the storytelling. This book was so good. It is hard to talk about the book in some ways without getting into spoilers, but I will be doing this spoiler free because I just want you guys to read it. That being said, there are some things about this book being a horror story that I want to address content-wise. It is a very gory book, which is also something I don't read very often, even though I would say a lot of the fantasy I read gets pretty violent sometimes, so that wasn't so much that there was gore, it was just how it came to be was so dark and so drastic. Yeah, and so that surprised me. It just, makes you feel icky, but in an appropriate, intended way, right? And there are some themes of gore and violence regarding animals that if that is not your jam, I would not recommend this book, but if it helps knowing that to go into it, then there you go. I think it was refreshing having read so many fantasy things lately. You guys know I love The Wheel of Time. It's it's amazing, and I've been really into it. But I forget how much I could just eat up a good standalone that is just so well written, and it doesn't have to worry about intense world building. It can just focus on the characters and the writing style. And it was nice to read that, but it was more than that. It was more than just a refresher. It was just so good. So I need to just stop saying it was so good and tell you why. I did learn some things from it, which is part of what I do on my channel, is talk about things I learned as a writer, sometimes as a person. So this book, since I should probably tell you what it's about, is a horror book about 4 young Native American men who, in their 20s-ish, they are part of an event. The blurb on the back of the book doesn't give you much about what event in these 4 Native men's lives that have affected them, obviously, so much. But for some slight just information, they do a thing. They don't think much of it. Even the one out of the 4 of them who's truly affected by their mistake they make as a group, and their choice that they make. Even the one of them who is kind of still sitting with it and was worried about it and was a little bit more emotional about it, they all move on. And then an entity, having been affected by said event, does not move on. And 10 years after the event, decides to enact revenge on these 4 men who are at this point living mostly separate lives. I just want to talk about what was effective and evocative about it without getting into the details, because it wasn't just a good plot. You've all heard that before. People in youth make mistake, spirit from that mistake forms and hunts them down and whatever. So, that's not beyond the realm of horror stories, and I'm not even a horror reader. I just picked this one up, and it happened to be the perfect choice for me. I also personally cannot relate as a white person, obviously, to the Native American experience. These men are from Blackfeet tribe, and they're just our mentionings of their experiences on the res. And I mean, I know I grew up close to reservations. I know I interacted with people who were Native. But it was I don't know, educational in a way where it was just here's these snippets of these people's lives that feel real rather than just informational. if that makes sense. Like, I wasn't being, like, educated as a white person. I was just watching people live their lives, but it still, like, showed me things that were important to them. And coming from what I think is a very real place from the author himself, so he can get specific about it, which I appreciated. So but you can also appreciate a lot of things about this. Even the themes themselves are still relatable to a wide variety of people, just not all the details and not all the reasons the themes come into play. To talk about some things that I liked and learned from, this writing style seems to be one of the things that people have critiqued the most. This is also a book that I actually gave 5 stars on Goodreads for, because I just loved it so much. And I don't do that. I don't even give anything any stars for the most part. I just keep track of what I'm reading. And occasionally I'll check out a review, but sometimes I'll check out reviews after I've read the book to find out if people hated it or loved it as much as I did, because I do that. I don't recommend authors do that for their own books, and if I ever get published, I will not do that for my own books. I'm saying this in advance. But I was curious what people thought about the book, and it seemed like a lot of people did not like the writing. The writing style is a little bit loose. It's very conversational in the sense that even though it's in third person for the most part, from the perspective of these men, you get an idea of their thoughts and their ramblings, and it feels so personal, which is the point. You want to care about these characters, you want to follow them on this journey, and you realize pretty quickly that you don't hate these men, and you get very into their, or you can, I mean, some people didn't like it, but the looser writing style, you have to pay attention to it, but it's not just spoon-feeding you the action and information, it's bringing you into their world, and it's also very funny. So he managed to be clever and funny and also full of heart. These characters talking about their own lives and the people that they love, especially the women in their lives, was so simple and beautiful and genuine that I wanted them to be okay. And that is a great motivation for horror stories, for stories of very intense fear and very intense entities that are bent on revenge, because you actually are concerned for these men, or I was. I think that's another thing, is that a lot of stories like this, you might be like, well, they deserve it, or I don't super care about the girl who goes down to the dark basement by herself very foolishly. That's on her. Like, she's being stupid. But in this sense, like, they're just living their lives and trying to move on from the past, or have almost completely forgotten about the past. And the genius writing of not only the writing style, but how he mentions something and you get the joke, but he doesn't over-explain it to you. Going along with that, I think one of my favorite things about this book is that he would mention something important to the character. And not everything you mention in a book has to be a Chekhov's gun or overly important to the plot. Some things that you mention about characters are just about the characters. And I'm sure there were some things in this book that were just simple, just to kind of build an image in your mind and a sense of who these people are. But he did that, and then everything basically wove back together, like related to things later about the characters. There were Chekhov's guns left and right, but they weren't just guns. They were every possible tool to this unraveling of their lives, and this like procession of events was so related to everything else. It was so interconnected to the point where it was like he would mention something later that he said earlier, and I would be like, I see what you did there, you son of a gun, you know what you're doing. Like, he knew what he was doing, and it was so well done. I think that in my writing, I have made like character sheets before where I've been like, and their favorite color is pink, and they like this, and this is their favorite song. If they were to live any place in the world, this is where they would live. This is their most, I don't know, this is their favorite holiday. Like, you see those character sheets? I actually think that those are pretty pointless. And he gives you a lot of that kind of information, but it's so important. And even when it's not, important to the plot. It's important to how you see the character. It's more about the archetype of that person that you see, because characters are not fully people, but these characters show actual lives of people, actual snippets of people's lives who are real, and it just felt so authentic, but at the same time, not a word was wasted, in my opinion. It just felt so intentional and effective and rich, and I loved it. So you care about the characters and everything interconnects. It's just layers. I love that. Obviously, again, no spoilers here, but the themes are so excellent as well. This book, like I've said, has some horror tropes and has some basic premise that without the extra details feels like it would just be any other frightening story about an entity who wants revenge. Like, it sounds like it could be basic, but it definitely wasn't, because certain tropes that happen, I think especially toward the end, have been like mentioned in so many scary movies and scary books, just scary stories in general, that you think like, oh, it's just because it's a trope, but he gives reason for it. He addresses generational trauma, how these men's past affect people around them, especially the women around them and their children. There's this young, like, middle school aged girl that I love, and you don't get her for a decent chunk of the book, and when you do, she feels well written. I don't know, like, if any of you have watched any of my other videos I've talked about before. I really hate when, like, children are written poorly, when it's, like, evident that a person has not spoken to a child before. But these, like, teenager, preteen kids that are mentioned or written about in this book feel just like little young people figuring it out. This young girl's very, very good at basketball, and her thought process behind things is so driven and so just awesome that it's like you feel the pride that her parents have for being their parents, and you want her to succeed at her stuff. There is a scene that I love too, where I was like, I can't believe I'm reading this right now, and I won't go into it too much, but as far as fight scenes go, I don't really like reading them very often. Watching them can also be tedious if they're filmed poorly, or if it's just this one long battle that I don't care about. I've mentioned in this Sword of Kaigen, one of my favorite books ever, I love those fight scenes, those sword fights. I can appreciate really well done fight scenes. Sometimes people will like the fight scenes or the action in a book, and I just cannot picture it. It does not translate in my brain. It doesn't make sense to me. But there was a scene in this book that wasn't necessarily an altercation, but was through the playing of basketball, one-on-one, that was so... I was like, man, this guy could teach high fantasy writers to make things make a little bit more sense and carry the tension so well. Tension in this book I thought was very well done. It's getting to the point where I want to talk about spoilers and I can't. I love these characters. I love this book. I thought it was so beautifully written. I felt like I read realistic fiction, like just contemporary fiction about Native American people and their little snippets of their lives, and then there was horror throughout it and gore. You know? I'm like, oh, yeah, that happened. Hold on a minute, if that makes sense. So I think that, if anything, this book is just so well layered and can serve so many purposes. And if you don't like reading violence for the sake of it, this book still carries so much intent and power and beautifully crafted storytelling that I just can't get over it. Anyway, this man's a genius, and I will be reading his other stuff, even though I'm an easily frightened person, but because it's not visual, I think that helps me. But if reading scares you just as much as seeing things, or if potentially more, careful with this one. But I ate this book up. I read it in like a week, which is actually pretty fast for me given my life, my schedule. And I recommend you guys check it out. If you have read this book, I want to know your thoughts down in the comments. I also recommend checking out other people's reviews, especially reviews by Native and Indigenous peoples. They can give you, I think, a better insight into their own lives than I can, obviously. But as far as the writing goes, what an excellent book. please just check it out. I will link some other videos about it down below, some other reviews. And yeah, I don't know. I don't even know what to say. It's just good. And if you want to read it, if it sounds interesting, please let me know. Please let me know if you do read it. Thank you guys so much for watching and for listening to me ramble about books. And I'll see you next time with another video. Bye.